For 14 months I had trembled in her presence, and when Princess Valeria finally demanded to know why I feared her so much, the truth came out. I was not afraid of her, I was in love with her, and I had been for every single one of those 14 months. The throne room echoed with the weight of 100 eyes upon me as I stood before it. Today's diplomatic reception was no different from any other formal wear, stiff pleasantries, masked smiles. They felt different. It began when Princess Valeria Vel'Kari walked directly toward me, her violet gaze piercing through the crowd like laser beams. "Your Highness," a fellow diplomat tried to intercept her, but failed as she continued unerringly towards me, her long silver braids swinging behind her pale blue skin. My heart raced. I had been sweating for over an hour, and now my palms felt slick with it. My feet were planted firmly on the floor, yet they might as well have turned to water beneath me. No escape was possible. She would make me talk in front of everyone here today. "Ambassador Chen," Princess Valeria called out loudly when she reached a stopping distance from me, her voice like thunder echoing through the cavernous room. "For 14 months I have observed you." My throat was dry and my mouth tasted bitter with fear. The court watched us now, anticipation hanging in every corner of this grand chamber, where Vel'Kari nobility gathered to make their deals and break bread. "Your Highness," I began lamely, stumbling over words that seemed too small for the gravity of her question. "I have no fears towards your Highness." She scoffed at my denial, but didn't back away from me as she closed in with each word. "You tremble when I approach. You avoid my eyes. You sweat through diplomatic functions." Her gaze was intense, and if it were any colder or darker, it would surely freeze the air around us. My knees went weak under her scrutiny. I couldn't think of what to say next. "Princess Vel'Kari," I forced out with renewed desperation in my voice, a plea for mercy on behalf of both our sakes. "It's true that every time you come near me," but she cut through the silence again with her demanding tone. "I am tired of it," Princess Valeria declared without any room left to maneuver around her statement. "I demand an answer. Why do you fear me so?" My mind reeled. I had no way out now. She was too close. My personal space evaporated in the face of this confrontation. She continued forward until there wasn't a single step between us anymore. Her eyes flickered downwards, to where we both knew he trembled most, her words echoing like a challenge. "Your body says otherwise." I couldn't look away from those piercing violet orbs any longer as she stared at me expectantly. Each moment felt elongated into hours while everyone waited for an answer. My palms were sweating freely now, but not due to fear. "Yes," I admitted miserably, trying not to sound weak or ashamed in front of the court that would surely see right through my lies either way by this point. "But not from fear." Her eyes narrowed slightly at my admission before she tilted her head curiously. "Then explain yourself." The room held its breath while Princess Valeria and I stood there under the weight of our gazes, no sound breaking the silence, but for the distant hum of palace machinery. "I do not fear you," I confessed with a voice barely above a whisper. "I tremble because you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." Silence fell heavier than stone as she stared back at me unblinkingly. My admission had shattered any pretense left to our public interaction. "I sweat," I continued, feeling every eye in the room upon us, while hers alone seemed to burn through the layers of fabric and skin that separated us, "because being near you makes it hard to breathe." She took another step closer, without breaking her intense gaze from mine. If possible, she was even more beautiful under this close scrutiny. "And I avoid your eyes," I admitted miserably, "because there would be no hiding anymore. Because when I look into them, I forget how to form words." The court seemed frozen in place as Princess Valeria stared at me, her expression unreadable but for the widening of those violet eyes now full of questions and something else entirely unknown. "I have been terrified," I confessed with a voice that quivered even more than my trembling frame would allow. "But not of you. Of this. Of everyone knowing that the human ambassador has been hopelessly in love with you since our first reception." Silence fell once again, thicker this time and suffocating within its walls. The court was frozen like a glacier carved. The silence stretched, thick and palpable as molten lava underfoot. The court watched us both like a pair of actors on an immense stage where tension was the script they all read from. Vel'Kari spoke first, her voice clear despite its sudden weightiness in this hushed moment. Everyone leave. No one moved immediately, frozen by what we just laid bare to them, or perhaps waiting for my denial to follow. But I couldn't deny it any more than she could ignore the truth now staring back at us. Vel'Kari turned slightly and locked eyes with each diplomat present before fixing her gaze on me once more. Her violet orbs burned with an intensity that left no room for misunderstanding now. The court dispersed in seconds, their movements swift yet hushed, as if reluctant to break this strange bond between Princess Valeria Vel'Kari and myself. Only I remained standing there while she faced me fully now, her intense gaze drilling into mine. The air seemed thinner here at the center of that vast throne room. "You expect me to believe," she began slowly, measuring each word out as carefully as a swordsmith crafts his blade, "that for 14 months you were not afraid, you were attracted?" I laughed weakly despite the nervousness gripping my heart. It was absurd how much I had denied this moment until now. "Yes," I admitted with trembling breath that seemed to amplify in those quiet moments between us. Vel'Kari circled me slowly like a predator circling its prey, her long silver braids brushing against my shoulder as she passed behind me. The feel of them made the hairs on my neck stand up and yet left me wanting more contact. 14 months, she repeated aloud to herself before addressing me again, with an edge in her voice that hinted at a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "I couldn't be sure. I trembled because you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," I reiterated, meeting her eyes finally, after avoiding them for what felt like years. "I sweat through diplomatic functions, not out of fear, but anticipation, of seeing your smile brighten when discussing history or poetry in 3 languages. She stopped circling and came to a halt directly in front of me once more. Her gaze softened ever so slightly as I continued, though it was still intense enough to leave my breath caught somewhere between the base of my spine and the back of my throat. "I remember everything," I admitted helplessly, unable to look away from her now that I had started down this path. "The way you tilt your head when thinking deeply about something, or how those violet eyes light up like 1,000 stars whenever discussing military strategy with your generals." Vel'Kari stared at me in silence for what felt an eternity before speaking again. "You remember that? My laughter after my joke regarding the ceremonial gift exchange 11 months ago?" I nodded, feeling more exposed than ever. "Yes," I replied softly but honestly. She moved closer, then closer still, until there was no space left between us. Her eyes searched mine deeply, as if trying to understand something she never expected could exist within me, a human ambassador's deep and unspoken affection for her. "Why did you never say anything?" Vel'Kari asked gently, though the question held an undercurrent of frustration mixed with curiosity that I couldn't quite place. I laughed bitterly at this. "You are a princess," I explained helplessly, gesturing around us to emphasize my point, "and I am but your human ambassador. It would be inappropriate, scandalous even, and politically disastrous," she murmured, as if agreeing with me despite the obviousness of what we were both doing by standing so close now in such a public setting. Her hand reached out and brushed against mine, fingers curling around my wrist gently before pulling back just as quickly. "There is no point now," Vel'Kari stated firmly but softly. "Your feelings cannot be hidden any longer." Before I could respond, or even catch my breath properly from her nearness, Princess Vel'Kari pressed a kiss to my lips. For a moment, shock paralyzed me. She had taken that leap of faith and plunged us both into the unknown depths of what we felt for each other. But then, slowly but surely, I returned it with equal fervor, denied feelings from 14 months bubbling up in this one fleeting touch. It was as if all our pent-up emotions burst forth at once, her hands gripping my shoulders tightly, enough to leave marks, my own arms wrapping around her waist and pulling us closer together until there wasn't a single inch left between us anymore. The kiss deepened, breath mingling freely now without fear of repercussions or consequences weighing on either of us. When we pulled apart finally, after what felt like hours, but was likely just minutes, I looked into those violet eyes again, a mix of surprise and understanding shining back at me from within them. I never imagined, Val, by evening, news traveled faster than any diplomatic courier. Or through Vel'Kari's grand palace corridors rumors swirled around like a whirlwind as everyone tried to decipher what exactly had transpired between Princess Valeria and Ambassador Chen during their intimate moment in the throne room. Amongst all this buzz was Lord Raxus, who had spent 2 years positioning himself as Valeria, his future consort. His heart pounded with rage when he heard that a mere human ambassador dared confess love to his princess. The thought of such a declaration being met not by execution, but rather silence, and then worse kiss was unbearable. Rumors flew thick and fast through the palace halls, each one more audacious than the last, as Lord Raxus' fury built with every whispered exchange he overheard. He could scarcely believe his ears when tales of Princess Valeria. His reaction reached him. Not only had she allowed this human to express his feelings openly, but she had kissed him back in front of everyone. Lord Raxus marched towards the throne room, where David was still recovering from their shared kiss, intending to challenge him. Ancient Vel'Kari tradition dictated that such a declaration must be settled by ritual combat between rivals, a brutal contest that determined not just supremacy over the princess, but honor itself. David stood at his chamber's mirror, barely recognizing himself as he prepared for what lay ahead, a duel with someone like Lord Raxus, who was trained in Vel'Kari martial arts. He tested each blade's weight and balance, knowing full well that if challenged to combat by a member of the royal court, declining would mean disgrace for both him and Princess Valeria. "Sir," said his aide quietly from behind him, "Lord Raxus challenges you." David nodded solemnly. "I cannot refuse," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else present. He felt sick with fear, but also resolute in knowing what needed to be done, no matter the cost. It was one thing for Valeria to see his love, it would be another entirely if she were forced to watch him run away. Valeria found David preparing a sight so out of place on him that her heart clenched with dread and fury at Lord Raxus's audacity in challenging him thusly without first speaking privately about the matter. She walked over, grabbing his hand, holding one blade from his grip. "You cannot do this," she insisted urgently, fear mingling strongly with resolve in her voice. David met her eyes with a heavy sigh, setting down the weapon before turning fully to face her. "I cannot refuse either," he admitted quietly yet firmly. "A refusal would mean dishonor for both of us." Her grip tightened on his wrist as she stared at him intensely. "He will kill you, Valeria," he warned through gritted teeth. David smiled sadly, knowing exactly what this moment meant for them both, how much trust and understanding lay between these words despite the danger that loomed ahead. "Probably," he agreed softly yet without hesitation. Then came his most honest statement, "But if I refuse, everyone will say you care for a coward." Her hands shook then, as she pulled him close again, pressing another kiss to his lips, almost desperately this time. "Valeria," his voice was fierce when she spoke next, "you will not die tomorrow," her command leaving no room for argument. He held on to her arms tightly before pulling back slightly so he could meet those violet eyes once more with resolve shining in their depths. "I will try," David promised solemnly, yet honestly, letting go of her gently, as if afraid to break something precious by holding on too tight anymore. The next morning saw the entire Vel'Kari court gathered for what was expected to be a brutal and swift defeat of Ambassador Chen. Lord Raxus moved with confidence through the arena set up within the palace courtyard. Everyone knew how skilled he was in combat, his long limbs making him an imposing figure even at rest. David entered last, looking far smaller against this backdrop, but not backing down from the challenge awaiting him. When Valeria, his eyes met his as he walked past her to take his place opposite Raxus across the dueling platform, there was nothing left unspoken between them. a silent understanding and mutual resolve burning brightly in both sets of eyes. The duel commenced with Lord Raxus making no secret of the advantage he held over David. He toyed with him at first, showing off his martial prowess by dodging each clumsy strike Ambassador Chen managed to throw against him, while retaliating with swift slashes that left thin lines of blood trailing down David's arms and legs. Vel'Kari, though, watched in horror as Raxus seemed intent on making this quick and brutal, mocking every move made by the human who dared love her. But despite being outmatched physically, something deeper within David refused to let him give up, not when there was a chance he could change Vel'Kari. Did I win? David croaked out weakly, the first coherent thought forming in his foggy mind. Vel'Kari. He laughed wetly, but it was a soundless laugh, as if even now she didn't quite believe what had transpired. You won, he admitted through gritted teeth. Barely. Stupidly. She paused and corrected herself with another soft, sorrowful chuckle. Stupidly well. David managed to crack a weak grin despite the pain coursing through his body. Worth it, he replied quietly. Her grip tightened on his hand as she leaned in closer, her eyes never leaving him. My father wants to see you. A chill ran down David's spine at those words. To exile me? His voice was barely above a whisper, but the fear in his tone was evident even through his exhaustion. Vel'Kari. He shook her head firmly, shaking off any doubts she might have had herself. Her gaze hardened with resolve and a fierce protectiveness that made him shiver for reasons he didn't dare admit aloud right then. To thank the man who loves his daughter enough to die for her honor. David's heart fluttered in surprise at those words before settling into an overwhelming warmth. He swallowed hard, trying to marshal his thoughts as she helped him off the medical bed and guided him towards the throne room. The walk seemed interminable, his body protesting every step with sharp pangs of pain, but Vel'Kari. His steady support kept him going forward despite his wobbly legs and dizzy head. Once inside the grand hall, King Vel'Kari stood waiting, a regal figure against the backdrop of polished marble floors and intricate tapestries. The king's eyes were hard but understanding as they fell on David first, then flicked to Vel'Kari, standing protectively beside him. Ambassador Chen, he greeted formally yet with an unusual edge that hinted at deeper emotions beneath his usual stoicism. David stood as straight as his injuries allowed and nodded respectfully. Yes, Your Majesty. The king's eyes narrowed slightly in contemplation before he spoke again, almost to himself, but audible enough for David. Most would call your actions foolish. David could only nod somberly. There was no denying the truth of that statement from an outsider's perspective. Most, King Vel'Kari continued thoughtfully, turning his intense gaze back onto Vel'Kari, first and then on David once more. They would be right. There seemed to be a moment where time stretched unnaturally long as both men stared each other down before the king finally broke into a rare Smilian approving nod of genuine respect for this human who had proven himself in ways far beyond anything they expected. My daughter cried for you, he stated matter-of-factly. She has not shed tears since her mother passed. David felt Vel'Kari, his hand tighten around his as she shifted closer, almost involuntarily drawn by the weightiness of these words and their implications. He looked between them both before meeting King Vel'Kari's eyes squarely, feeling an unexpected calm settle over him. Since our first reception, he confessed openly now that it was clear how things would unfold, if only by grace alone. Every day since. King stepped forward then, extending his hand with an almost imperceptible nod of approval towards David. Then, I will not stand in the way of what my daughter has clearly chosen. David took the proffered hand and gave it a firm shake, despite still feeling weak from his injuries. A year later found them standing at their own wedding reception, every noble present witnessing the human who once trembled before her now confidently dancing with Princess Valeria. He could feel eyes on him as they waltzed, but in that moment all he saw was her smiling face and vibrant violet eyes twinkling up at him. You still tremble around me, she teased gently from beside him. David laughed lightly against the side of her neck, where his cheek rested briefly before pulling away slightly to look down into her intense gaze. Different reason now. Her laughter mixed with delight as they continued their dance, swaying gracefully across the hall. What reason? He pulled her even closer, resting a hand at the small of her back while she intertwined fingers around his neck. It was an intimate gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone watching, but felt incredibly natural to them both now. "Because I still cannot believe you chose me," he confessed.